At a family dinner I hosted, Sophia's mother asked, "And you are?" Sophia then laughed, calling me our unofficial maid. Everyone, even my son, chuckled. I simply excused myself. The next morning, I handed Sophia the keys and calmly said, "Good luck paying the mortgage now." Then I walked out. What happened next changed everything. Like, share, and tell me where you're listening from. For decades, I poured myself into my family. Not just my son, Marcus, but his wife, Sophia, and even her parents. My love, my time, my money. I gave it all without question, without expecting much in return. Just a little warmth, a flicker of appreciation. But lately, that flicker had died down to nothing. I felt like a ghost in my own home, unseen, unheard, slowly fading into the wallpaper while the life I built went on around me without acknowledging my existence. The silence of being unappreciated had become deafening. The evening that changed everything started like many others. I had spent the entire day preparing dinner. It was a special occasion. Sophia's parents, the Sterlings, were visiting. And Sophia wanted everything perfect. I cooked Sophia's favorite roast, made 2 kinds of mashed potatoes, and even baked a complicated dessert I knew Mrs. Sterling enjoyed. I was serving the wine, moving between the kitchen and the dining room, ensuring everyone's glass was full. The conversation was lively, a lot of laughter, mostly from Sophia and her mother. I walked back into the dining room, an empty wine bottle in my hand, ready to grab another from the cellar. Sterling, Sophia's mother, was holding court, telling some anecdote about her yacht club. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the table, then landed on me. A condescending smile touched her lips as she asked, her voice dripping with feigned politeness. "And you are?" The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. A polite query, perhaps, to an outsider, but devastating to me. The woman who had prepared their meal, opened her home, and was, by all rights, the matriarch of this very house. My breath hitched. Before I could even formulate a response, Sophia, my own daughter-in-law, let out a tinkling laugh. It was a bright, cheerful sound, completely devoid of empathy. "Oh, that's Eleanor," she chirped, as if explaining an obscure, harmless object. "Our unofficial maid. She keeps the house running." You know, the words hit me like a physical blow. Unofficial maid. My own home, my own flesh and blood, reducing me to hired help, and a casual, unacknowledged one at that. A wave of heat washed over my face, followed by an icy chill. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the empty wine bottle a cold weight in my hand. Then, the laughter started. Mr. Sterling chuckled. Mrs. Sterling offered a snobbish titter, and even Marcus, my son, my only son, let out a soft, almost embarrassed laugh. It wasn't a loud, mocking laugh, but it was there, a sound that sliced through me, shattering something delicate inside my chest. His complicity, his silent agreement with their disrespect, was the final shard. My heart didn't just break, it pulverized into dust. I managed to take a shaky breath. "Please excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, a whisper that seemed to cut through the fading laughter. I turned on my heel, walking away from the table, away from their amused faces, away from the life I had so carefully constructed. I walked down the hall, past the living room, past Marcus's old trophies, and into my bedroom. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me in a sudden, profound silence. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the quiet enveloping me. My gaze fell upon a framed photograph on my nightstand. A younger Marcus, maybe 5 years old, grinning toothlessly, his arm wrapped around my neck. I remembered buying this house. Marcus was barely 20, struggling to find his footing, dreams bigger than his wallet. He had no job, no savings, nothing. I had worked tirelessly, saving every penny from my long hours. I remembered signing the mortgage papers, my name alone on the dotted line, my hard-earned money making the down payment. This house was mine, bought with my sacrifices, built on my hope for a better future for us. For him, I raised him alone, pouring every ounce of myself into making sure he had a stable home, a secure foundation. And now, I was an unofficial maid. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, the laughter and Sophia's cruel words echoing in the silence. But beneath the pain, something else was brewing, a quiet resolve, cold and hard. The next morning, the house was just beginning to stir. Sophia was in the kitchen, making her special coffee, humming a tune. Marcus was likely still asleep. I walked up to Sophia, her back to me as she filled the coffee maker. Without a word, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the heavy bunch of house keys. Front door, back door, garage, mailbox, and placed them silently on the counter beside her. Sophia turned, a surprised look on her face. She picked them up, her brow furrowed. "What's this, Eleanor?" she asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice. I met her gaze, my voice calm, almost emotionless. "Good luck paying the mortgage now." Her eyes widened, her humming stopped. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't wait. I simply turned and walked away. I walked out of the kitchen, past the dining room where the cruel laughter had taken place, past the living room that had been my sanctuary. I left everything. The furniture I had bought, the heirlooms I had cherished, the garden I had nurtured. I took nothing but my purse and the old worn coat draped over a chair by the door, the very coat I had worn when I brought Marcus home from the hospital, a tiny bundle in my arms. As I reached the front door, I heard Marcus's voice, raw with confusion and panic. "Eleanor. Mom." He was running after me, his bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. "Wait, where are you going?" I didn't stop. I pushed the door open, stepped out into the crisp morning air, and didn't look back. His calls faded behind me as I walked purposefully to my car, parked in the driveway. Sliding into the driver's seat, I didn't feel the tidal wave of rage I expected, nor the crippling grief. Instead, there was a quiet, terrifying clarity, a certainty that settled deep in my bones. I put the key in the ignition, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I saw Marcus, standing on the porch, barefoot, his face a mask of utter shock and bewilderment. He stood there, watching me go, completely unaware of the magnitude of what he had just lost. The drive was silent, the road stretching out before me. My destination was Aunt Clara's small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't freedom I felt immediately. Not joy or relief. It was a profound, echoing silence, a vast emptiness where the weight of my past life had been. It was the sound of being truly alone, for the very first time. The days at Aunt Clara's small apartment blurred into an indistinguishable gray. I moved through the quiet rooms like a ghost, a shell of the woman I used to be. Each morning, I woke with a jolt, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone, half expecting to see a missed call, a text message, anything from Marcus. But the screen remained stubbornly blank. The silence from him was more cutting than any argument could have been. I found myself oscillating between two crushing possibilities. Either Sophia's venomous influence had completely poisoned him against me, twisting his perception until he saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience, or, a far colder thought, he simply didn't care. The latter was the one that truly twisted the knife in my heart. After everything, all the years, all the sacrifices, could I truly mean so little? I spent hours staring out the window, watching the leaves fall, each one a testament to the passage of time, to the unreturned calls. My mind replayed fragments of my life with Marcus. The joy of his birth, a moment I remembered as the purest happiness I had ever known. The struggle of raising him alone, a single mother navigating a world that wasn't always kind. I remembered putting my own career aspirations on hold, choosing jobs that offered flexibility over advancement so I could be there for every scraped knee, every school play, every late-night conversation. I had used the entirety of my parents' inheritance, not on myself, not on luxuries, but on that house, a secure home for us, a place where Marcus could grow up feeling safe and loved. And now, it was gone, along with the son I thought I had raised. To cope with the overwhelming emptiness, I started to write. Aunt Clara had left behind a stack of old spiral notebooks, their covers faded, their pages yellowed. I picked up a pen and began to pour out decades of unspoken pain, years of small slights, of feeling taken for granted, of the increasing invisibility that had culminated in Sophia's cruel remark. I wrote about the humiliation of being called the help in my own home, the sting of Marcus's laugh, the profound sense of betrayal. The words flowed, a torrent of raw emotion, filling page after page. It was a strange kind of therapy, a way to acknowledge the hurt I had suppressed for so long. One afternoon, a light bulb burned out in the small, dusty storage closet next to the bathroom. I fumbled around, trying to find a spare. My hand brushed against something cold and hard, tucked away on a high shelf. It was a heavy, rusted metal trunk, the kind old-fashioned travelers might have used. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Aunt Clara was always a bit of a pack rat, but this trunk had a mysterious, almost ominous presence. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't indulged in a long time, pricked at me. I wrestled the trunk down, dust motes dancing in the meager light. It creaked open with a groan, revealing a treasure trove of forgotten memories. Inside, nestled amongst old blankets and faded photographs, were dozens of envelopes, tied together with string. Many were addressed to Clara herself, old letters from distant relatives, but then I saw it. An envelope, slightly thicker than the others, addressed to me, Eleanor, written in Clara's familiar, elegant handwriting, and a date, decades ago, almost exactly when Marcus was born. A chill ran down my spine. Why had she kept this? Why had she never given it to me? My hands trembled as I carefully opened the seal. Inside, there was a letter, several pages long, written in Clara's neat script. I started to read. Clara wrote about her visit to the hospital after Marcus's birth. She recounted a strange feeling she had, a nagging doubt that something wasn't quite right. She mentioned a last-minute room change on the maternity ward, a hurried shuffle of newborns, and a brief moment of confusion. She said she saw two nurses whispering, looking worried. Clara, always astute, had noticed something amiss, a small detail about the baby she had seen being taken from my room compared to the one brought back. She had tried to dismiss it, but the feeling had never truly left her. As I continued reading, my eyes scanning the pages, I found more. Tucked within the letter were copies of old hospital forms, notes scribbled on official letterheads, and then a photograph, a tiny, sepia-toned picture of a newborn baby, swaddled tightly, its eyes squeezed shut. And beneath it, scrawled in faint ink, the name, Daniel Harrison. Not Marcus, Daniel Harrison. I read the letter again, slowly, painstakingly, every word sinking in, then a third time, just to be sure my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. The realization dawned, a cold, clear, undeniable truth. The pieces of a lifetime of unspoken questions, of subtle disconnects, of a love that always felt a little off-kilter, suddenly clicked into place. Daniel Harrison was my son, my real son, and Marcus was not. Instead of the grief I might have expected, or the explosive rage at such a profound deception, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't freedom in the joyous sense, but a deep, resonant peace. Marcus's coldness, his casual dismissal, his easy laughter at my humiliation. It all made a terrible, undeniable sense now. He wasn't my son. The inexplicable distance, the feeling that our hearts never quite synced. It wasn't me being a bad mother. It wasn't me being crazy. It was simply biology. He wasn't mine, and I wasn't his. The burden of guilt I had carried for years, the constant self-doubt about why our relationship was so strained, lifted instantly. I felt not crazy. I delved deeper into the trunk. More documents. Copies of DNA reports, dated years after Marcus's birth, confirming the non-paternity. Affidavits from former hospital staff, some admitting to a cover-up, to a swap orchestrated by a desperate family who had lost their own child. And then, a small, faded newspaper article, cut from a local paper, dated 25 years ago. It celebrated the success of the Harrison family, prominent figures in our town, their thriving business, their handsome son, Daniel Harrison, my son. He had grown up just miles away, under a different roof, with a different name. I walked to the small bathroom, flicked on the light, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide, dark circles beneath them. I looked broken, yes, but something else was there too. A spark, a nascent fire. The woman staring back at me was waking up. Weeks bled into one another, marked by a punishing silence in Aunt Clara's apartment. I existed in a strange limbo. The dangerous truth of Clara's letter. A constant, heavy presence within me. It wasn't just a secret. It was a living, breathing entity that shaped every thought, every quiet moment. I spent countless hours rereading the hospital files, cross-referencing dates and names. Daniel Harrison. Born on the same night as Marcus. In the same hospital wing, the undeniable facts stared back at me from faded paper, confirming the cruel swap. A profound grief settled over me, not for the son I had lost in that moment of discovery, but for the son I had never known. I grieved the stolen time, the birthdays uncelebrated, the first steps I never witnessed, the school plays I didn't attend. I mourned the scraped knees I never mended, the bedtime stories I never read, the everyday parenting moments that should have been mine. Decades of a life I should have shared with Daniel Harrison, erased by a careless, or perhaps malicious, act. It was a phantom pain, aching for a past that never was. In the quiet hours, I reflected on my relationship with Marcus. I had loved him with every fiber of my being, an unconditional love that had overcome countless challenges. But now, seeing his failure to defend me, his casual complicity in my humiliation, forced a brutal reevaluation. Was it truly unconditional love? Or was it a mother's instinct blindly pouring into a child who was not her own? A child who never truly reciprocated that deep, inherent bond. The truth of Daniel changed everything, reframing every interaction, every perceived slight, every moment of disconnect. One Tuesday afternoon, driven by an instinct I couldn't ignore, I took a bus into town. I walked past familiar shops, the scents of coffee and old books filling the air. My heart pounded as I crossed the street, finally stopping directly opposite Harrison's Books. It was a quaint, inviting storefront, large windows displaying new releases and comfortable armchairs. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and there he was. Through the glass, I saw him, Daniel Harrison. He looked to be around 30, tall, with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression. His hair was neat, a clean-cut look that spoke of care and attention to detail. He was helping a young woman, patiently guiding her through shelves of poetry, his hands gesturing gently as he explained different authors. There was an ease about him, a genuine warmth in his smile. He exuded a quiet strength, a sense of belonging. He was everything I imagined my son to be. A tear slipped down my cheek, then another. I stood there on the sidewalk, a stranger watching her son, feeling an overwhelming surge of emotion. It was a mix of profound sadness for the years lost, but also an unexpected flicker of pride. He was a good man. The son I had never known, now so clearly visible. I cried silently, the tears a testament to the decades of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. This became my ritual. Every day, or nearly every day, I would make my way to town, find a discreet spot, and simply watch Daniel. I observed his interactions with customers, his meticulous way of arranging books, the way he laughed with his employees. It was a process of mourning the past, yes, but also a preparation. I was absorbing him, learning about the man he had become, slowly building a picture of the life he had lived. But my focus wasn't entirely on Daniel. Simultaneously, a cold, strategic part of my mind began to track Marcus and Sophia. Without the emotional fog of motherhood clouding my judgment, I saw them with a chilling clarity. I started with Sophia's social media, her lifestyle coaching brand, Olivia Ascends. Olivia was her middle name, which she preferred for branding. was everywhere. Glossy photos, aspirational captions, posts about manifesting abundance and achieving dreams. But as I dug deeper, I noticed the patterns. The luxury retreats were always in rented Airbnb mansions. The exclusive networking events looked suspiciously like paid-for influencer meet and greets. The follower count was impressive, but the engagement felt manufactured. Maxed-out credit cards for lavish appearances. It was all smoke and mirrors, a carefully constructed illusion. Then came the bigger shock about Marcus. He had quit his stable, well-paying job 6 months ago. Sophia had posted about it. Of course, framing it as Marcus manifesting a new chapter, a bold step towards their shared entrepreneurial dreams. But to my now sharpened eyes, it looked like sheer delusion. He was relying on Sophia's brand and their combined wishful thinking to pay the bills. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They were drowning. Drowning in debt. Constructing a fragile house of cards that was destined to collapse. The beautiful home I had provided, the financial cushion I had created, had enabled their fantasy, convincing them that consequence was a concept for other people. I bought a second spiral notebook, a stark contrast to the one where I poured out my emotions. This one was purely strategic. I started meticulously documenting everything. Dates of social media posts, public records of business filings, property tax assessments, credit bureau reports I could access through public databases, and any other financial detail I could uncover. I cross-referenced information, built timelines, and created a detailed picture of their precarious financial situation. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it fueled me. I felt more present, more analytical, more strategic than I had in years. The quiet woman they had dismissed as the help was gone. In her place, a cold, calculating force was emerging, preparing to remind them exactly what they had lost, and exactly who still held the power. A week after my first sighting of Daniel, a rainy Thursday brought me back to Harrison's books. The sky was a sullen gray, matching the quiet anxiety in my chest. I hesitated at the door, then pushed it open, the small bell above jingling softly. Daniel was at the counter, sorting through a stack of new arrivals. As I stepped further inside, our eyes met. He offered a polite, gentle smile, the kind that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. For a split second, I froze, caught in the sudden intimacy of that gaze. The immense weight of the truth I carried, the decades of unspoken agony, crashed over me. My hands started to tremble, a nervous tremor I couldn't control. I quickly averted my gaze, pretending to be absorbed in a display of local history books, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't face him. Not yet. Not with this overwhelming secret. I mumbled an apology to an empty shelf and hurried out of the store, the cold rain a welcome shock against my burning face. Back in Aunt Clara's apartment, I pulled out her letter again, needing to ground myself in its facts. I reread the part about the hospital's quiet settlement with the Harrison family, a hush-hush agreement that confirmed the swap and bought their silence, promising them a future for the child they adopted, unaware he wasn't theirs by blood. The details were stark, confirming the callousness of the institution and the profound impact it had on two families. The next day, I gathered my courage. I decided to try again, but this time, I would go in with a purpose. I needed a book, something small, something non-committal. I picked out a classic novel, one I had always meant to read. As I approached the counter, Daniel looked up, that same warm smile on his face. "Find everything you need?" he asked, his voice smooth and calm. It was the first time I had heard him speak directly to me, and it sent a strange warmth through my chest, mixed with a familiar ache. My throat tightened, making it hard to speak. "Yes, thank you," I managed, pushing the book towards him. He scanned the barcode, his fingers nimble. "Ah, a good choice," he remarked, looking at the cover. "Hard to find these days, especially a first edition like this. Classic." He paused, a thoughtful look on his face. "This one always reminds me of quiet evenings." His words, so simple, so genuinely appreciative of literature, made my heart ache even more. It was a stark contrast to Marcus, who rarely picked up a book, preferring quick entertainment on his phone. In that moment, I learned another piece of Daniel. This was his passion, his world. Later, in casual conversation, I learned he owned the place, that his parents, the Harrisons, had helped him set it up, believing in his vision. They had given him support, encouragement, a foundation. Not just money, but belief. Unlike Marcus, who had only had my sacrifices and had taken them for granted, over the following weeks, my visits to Harrison's books became a regular routine. Every few days, I would walk in, casually browse the shelves, and engage in small talk. We talked about new releases, the changing weather, local events. I kept my questions general, observational, never prying. I was careful, watching for any sign of suspicion, but Daniel was simply kind, open, and friendly. One afternoon, as I was paying for a biography, he paused, looking at me with a curious expression. "You know," he said, a slight frown on his brow, "you remind me of someone I can't quite place. It's odd." My heart leaped into my throat. Had he seen something? Recognized a subtle familial resemblance? I forced a small smile. "Oh, really?" I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Perhaps a librarian I used to be?" It was a safe, self-deprecating joke, and he chuckled, letting the thought go. Meanwhile, 3 weeks after I had walked out, Marcus finally sent a message. One single text. "Mom, are you okay?" It was devoid of apology, devoid of concern for where I might be living, or how I was managing. Just a perfunctory question. I looked at the screen for a long time. Then I put my phone down. I did not reply. The time for that kind of superficial concern was long past. While I was slowly building a connection with Daniel, I was also systematically dismantling the remnants of my old life. I pulled up the deed to my house. It was still solely in my name, a fact Sophia had clearly overlooked in her haste to secure her lifestyle. I discovered through public records that Sophia had attempted to refinance the house about a month ago, likely to free up cash for her failing business, but had been denied. My signature was required, and without it, she had hit a wall. Good. I resolved not to evict them immediately. No. That would be too quick, too merciful. I wanted them to feel the slow, agonizing, unraveling. I wanted them to experience the fear, the creeping dread, the realization that their entire foundation was built on sand, and that the unofficial Maid was the one holding the shovel. My strategic journal grew thicker. Every detail Daniel shared about his life, his family, his aspirations, was meticulously noted. Every piece of information about Marcus and Sophia's mounting debt, their desperate financial maneuvers, was recorded. I was striving to understand the son I never raised, while simultaneously mapping out the collapse of the son who had betrayed me. The contrast between Daniel and Marcus was stark, a vivid illustration that Marcus's poor treatment of me was not an accident, but a choice. Daniel, a complete stranger, showed me more innate kindness, more genuine respect in a few weeks of casual interaction than Marcus had in years. I knew I couldn't keep the truth from Daniel forever. The moment was coming when I would have to tell him everything. About the hospital switch, about our stolen lives, about the profound deception that had shaped our destinies. But first, I had to conclude the collapse of my old life, to ensure that Marcus and Sophia understood the consequences of their actions. It was time to reclaim what was mine, legally and emotionally. I picked up the phone. I called a lawyer, a sharp, direct woman whose reputation for efficiency preceded her. "I need to file a motion," I stated, my voice steady, "to sell the house I legally own." The words were empowering, each one a step towards reclaiming my rights. Welcome back to my story. If you've been following along, you know things are about to get interesting. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss a single part of what happens next. The legal hammer was about to fall. I sat by the window in Aunt Clara's apartment, stirring honey into my chamomile tea, a profound calm settling over me. My lawyer, Miss Hayes, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a sharp legal mind, had just confirmed she had sent the official notice. It was a formal eviction warning, coupled with notice of intent to sell the property. A clear, undeniable statement of my intent. The wheels were in motion. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. I watched his name flash across the screen, then declined the call. Moments later, a text popped up. "Mom, what are you doing? Please call me. Sophia is freaking out." The words were laced with panic, but still, no apology, no real concern for my well-being, only for their immediate comfort. I set my phone down, ignoring it. The silence was my reply. A week passed. The silence from them was broken only by a voicemail from Sophia. Her voice, usually carefully modulated for her brand, was tight with barely contained hysteria. "Eleanor," she began, the forced sweetness quickly dissolving. "This is a complete misunderstanding. You're putting our lives at risk. You can't just do this." Her words, particularly the possessive, "our lives," struck me. It was never my life or your life, always our lives, as if my existence was merely an extension of theirs, meant to serve their ambitions. Her language, her immediate jump to self-preservation, solidified my resolve even further. There would be no turning back. 2 days later, there was a frantic knocking at Aunt Clara's door. I peered through the peephole. It was Marcus. He looked disheveled, his hair messy, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. He was unraveling, the carefully constructed facade of his privileged life cracking under pressure. He looked nothing like the confident young man I had last seen laughing at my expense. He called out my name, his voice raw and desperate. I watched him through the small lens, feeling a strange detachment. I thought of all the times I had tried to reach him, to express my concerns, to share my pain, only to be dismissed, unheard. I left him standing there, on the other side of the closed door, letting him experience the discomfort of being unheard, just as I had been for years. The knocking eventually stopped, and I heard his defeated footsteps retreat. The following week, Miss Hayes finalized the paperwork to officially list the house on the market. She assured me that since the deed was solely in my name, and I had purchased it outright with my inheritance, I would receive the full profit from the sale. Sophia, true to form, attempted to fight it, claiming contribution of value to the property through her design choices and lifestyle upgrades. Miss Hayes had simply laughed. Her contribution, she's told me, was entirely aesthetic and superficial, not an investment in the property's equity. If anything, her opulent renovations may actually narrow the buyer pool. Sophia's lawyer, likely seeing the futility, quickly dismissed the claim. Word of my actions spread quickly through our small town. The gossip started subtly, then escalated. Sophia's carefully curated image began to crumble. Her parents, who had always been a safety net, quietly withdrew their financial support, unwilling to be associated with such public financial instability. Clients, who had been drawn to her aspirational branding, started backing out of contracts. Her inspirational social media posts, once lauded, now faced harsh scrutiny, comments questioning the authenticity of her abundance mindset when her own house was being sold out from under her. The house of cards I had predicted was collapsing, piece by painful piece. While their world imploded, I maintained my quiet routine. I continued my visits to Daniel's bookstore. These moments were my sanctuary. We would share a cup of coffee from the small cafe he ran within the store, discussing books, authors, and life in general. His calm demeanor, his genuine love for literature, was a balm to my soul. One afternoon, he recommended a memoir about grief and forgiveness, its cover a muted landscape. "It's a beautiful, raw book," he said, his eyes reflecting a quiet understanding, "about finding peace after profound loss." I took the book, tracing my finger over the title. "Peace," I mused, a small, wry smile touching my lips. "I'm not quite ready for either grief or forgiveness, Daniel." "Not yet." He nodded, sensing the deeper meaning behind my words, but didn't press. He simply offered another kind smile, a silent acceptance. Back at Aunt Clara's, in the evenings, I began the meticulous task of boxing up old photographs of Marcus. Pictures from his childhood, school events, graduations, each image brought a pang, a ghost of a memory, but no longer the intense heartache. I was putting away my past identity as Marcus's mother, making space for a new one. I realized I was no longer angry. Anger was an emotion for something that still mattered in the same way. What I felt now was clarity. I was awake. As the for sale sign went up on the lawn of my old house, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Daniel, my real son, remained unaware of the changes coming to his life. Changes that weren't tragedies, but rather beginnings. New chapters. For both of us. As the for sale sign stood proudly on the lawn of my former house, Sophia's public mask remained flawlessly in place. Her social media continued to hum with aspirational posts, her smile wide and seemingly unbothered. She was a master of illusion, projecting an image of unshakable success even as her foundation crumbled. But I knew the truth, and I was determined to shatter that mask completely, to expose the sham she had built. I hired a business consultant named Arthur. He was a quiet man, unassuming, with a reputation for discretion and meticulousness. I tasked him with a deep audit of Sophia Ascends LLC. I provided him with everything I had gathered: public filings, social media links, my observations, and the vague sense of unease I'd always felt about her brand. Arthur went to work, a silent, methodical bloodhound. His findings were more shocking than I had anticipated, even with my growing suspicions. Sophia's entire business model was a house of cards built on outright lies. There were no tax filings for 2 consecutive quarters, a glaring red flag for any legitimate business. He uncovered forged invoices from vendors who didn't exist, used to inflate her expenses and justify lavish spending. Her dazzling photo shoots were entirely staged, often in rented locations, with models acting as satisfied clients. Her exclusive coaching programs had almost no actual participants, just a handful of freeloaders given access for testimonials. Arthur confirmed what I already knew. Sophia Ascends LLC was nothing more than an elaborate, financially unsustainable performance. Public exposure of this, Arthur stated, his voice calm but firm, would mean she's finished. Financially, professionally. This isn't just about debt, Eleanor. This is fraud. He handed me a thick binder, filled with undeniable evidence, carefully compiled. I took the binder home, my hands steady. I printed out every incriminating document, every forged invoice, every proof of non-filing. I added the pages of Sophia's own Instagram posts, highlighting the glaring inconsistencies. Then, I placed it all in a large manila envelope. I addressed it to Sophia's parents, the Sterlings, at their private residence. I included a small, anonymous note, typewritten. Everything you think you know is a performance. I mailed it with a chilling sense of purpose. 2 days later, the digital world began to shake. Sophia's Instagram, usually buzzing with daily updates, went eerily quiet. Her last inspirational post, a beaming selfie with a motivational quote, was suddenly flooded with strange comments. Not just the usual supportive messages, but subtle, pointed questions. Heard some interesting things about your LLC, Olivia. Care to comment? And is it true about the tax filings? Then, just as suddenly, the comments disappeared, likely deleted by Sophia. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Her website, the gleaming portal to her empire, went offline for maintenance. Her latest exclusive workshop, heavily promoted just a week prior, was cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. The carefully constructed facade was cracking, piece by digital piece. An old neighbor, a kind woman who still occasionally checked in on me, called. She had seen Sophia's mother leaving the house I used to own, her face red with fury, shouting into her phone. I knew it. I knew something wasn't right. She reportedly screamed, getting into her luxury car and speeding away. The Sterlings had found the package. Later that evening, Marcus called again, his voice truly frantic this time. Mom, I don't know what's happening, he pleaded, the desperation clear in his tone. Olivia's parents aren't speaking to us. They cut off her credit cards. Everything's falling apart. Did you do this? His voice was filled with accusation, but also a raw confusion. He was seeing Sophia, truly seeing her, for the first time without my protective financial shield, and in his question, there was a glimmer of understanding of my involvement. I listened to his message, the faint buzz of his panic filling the quiet apartment, but still, I did not reply. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about allowing him to finally confront the reality of Sophia, the truth of his own complicity in a life built on illusion. He needed to face the consequences, to own his part in allowing me to be dismissed and disrespected for so long. That night, a strange pull drew me to Daniel's bookstore. It was late, almost closing time. As I approached, he looked up from behind the counter, a smile lighting his face. He waved me in. "Eleanor," he said warmly, "you should just work here. You're always around." I smiled back, a genuine, unforced smile. He had no idea how much that simple invitation meant. We sat on the floor, surrounded by towering shelves of books, cataloging a new shipment of paperbacks, the quiet rustle of pages, a comforting sound. The rhythm of the work was soothing, grounding. "Why do you come here, Eleanor?" Daniel asked suddenly, his voice soft, his gaze thoughtful. He looked up, and in the warm glow of the lamps, I noticed it again. His eyes. They were the same shade of hazel as mine, a small, undeniable echo of our shared biology. I paused, holding a book, weighing my words. "I like the way it feels in here," I replied, looking around the cozy, authentic space. Like nothing's pretending to be something it's not. A quiet understanding settled between us, a wordless acknowledgement that transcended our casual acquaintance. In that moment, surrounded by the honest scent of paper and ink, I felt truly seen. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was no longer a ghost in my own life. The days blurred into weeks, marked by the slow, inexorable crumbling of Marcus and Sophia's world. I observed it all from a distance, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and something akin to sorrow. He was finally feeling the persistent heartbreak, the slow burn of loss, as the house went on the market and Sophia's meticulously crafted deceit was exposed to her parents and, eventually, to the wider public. The silence from him was a heavy weight, but it was a silence born of consequences, not indifference. One crisp morning, a tentative knock echoed through my small apartment. I knew immediately who it was. I opened the door slowly, revealing Marcus standing on the threshold. He was a shadow of his former self. His face was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot and hollow, deep circles beneath them. He looked thinner, as if the stress had begun to consume him from the inside out. His clothes were rumpled, his usually confident posture slumped. He stood awkwardly, uncertain, a stark contrast to the entitled son who had presided over my humiliation. I stepped aside, letting him in. He moved cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. He didn't sit, just stood in the middle of the living room, hands clasped in front of him, looking lost. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken accusations and years of neglect. It was a silence I had known intimately, and now he was experiencing it. Finally, Marcus broke it, his voice hoarse. "Why are you doing this, Mom?" he asked, his gaze pleading. "Why are you doing this to us?" The word us hung in the air, and I almost laughed. Us. He still didn't get it. My voice was calm, steady, devoid of the anger that had once consumed me. "I'm not doing anything to you, Marcus," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm doing something for me." He flinched, as if struck. "But the house," he protested, his voice rising slightly. "You're selling the house." "My house. I grew up there. It's home." "Yes, it is being sold," I stated plainly. "And it was my house. I bought it. With my money. With my name on the deed. And you stood by, Marcus, and let your wife turn me into your unofficial maid in that very house." He winced, looking away. I thought you were just being dramatic," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know it hurt you like that." My gaze hardened. "That's the problem, Marcus," I retorted. the words sharp but precise. You never bothered to know what hurt me. You never saw me, really saw me, beyond what I could do for you. He swallowed hard, running a hand through his messy hair. Sophia's not who I thought she was, he admitted, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. I didn't offer comfort. That's not news to me, I replied, my voice flat. His eyes welled up, and a single tear tracked a path down his grubby cheek. I lost everything, he whispered, his voice cracking. No, Marcus, I countered firmly. You didn't lose everything. You gave it away. You chose to value an illusion over reality. You chose to devalue the person who sacrificed everything for you. He shook his head, looking utterly defeated. I miss you, Mom, he said, barely a whisper. Do you? I asked, a hint of steel in my voice. Do you miss the woman who cooked your meals, cleaned your house, paid your mortgage, and let you take her for granted? Or do you miss the convenience of that life? I reminded him of my sacrifices, of his complicity, of his betrayal. The words were not meant to wound, but to cut through the layers of his self-pity and make him see. He began to pace, agitated. So, that's it? He asked, throwing his hands up in frustration. You just walk away? After everything? I watched him for a long moment. Then, I walked over to Aunt Clara's trunk, which I had kept open. I pulled out the worn manila envelope containing the truth. I walked back to Marcus and handed it to him. Read this, I instructed, my voice unwavering. And really listen. He took the envelope, his brow furrowed in confusion. He pulled out the documents, the copies of the birth records, Aunt Clara's letter, the DNA reports. His eyes scanned the pages, first slowly, then frantically. His face grew paler and paler with each word. The color drained from his cheeks until he looked ashen. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. This can't be real, he whispered, his voice trembling. You're saying I'm not your son? I'm saying you weren't born to me, Marcus, I confirmed, my voice soft but clear. But I raised you as if you were. I loved you, and gave you everything I had. As if you were. He stared at the documents, then at me, then back at the papers. His world was shattering around him, just as mine had when I first read those words. So who's your real son? He asked, the question barely audible. I remained silent, allowing him to absorb the magnitude of the revelation. It wasn't my place to reveal Daniel. Not yet. He shook his head, tears streaming freely now. I don't know who I am anymore, he whispered, utterly lost. Now you know how I felt, Marcus, I replied, the words a mirror of my own past pain. I walked him to the door. He paused, turning to face me, desperation in his eyes. Can we fix this, Mom? Please, can we fix this? I met his gaze, my own eyes clear and resolute. I don't know, I said honestly. But it's not my job to try anymore. Then, gently, I closed the door. On him, on our past, on the decades of unequal effort. I leaned against the door, feeling a profound sense of peace and finality. I was no longer the one holding it open. The 3 days after Marcus's visit were a blur of nervous anticipation. I paced Aunt Clara's small apartment, practicing how to tell Daniel the truth, rehearsing the words in my head, struggling to find a way to convey decades of pain and revelation without overwhelming him. There was no perfect script, I realized. Only honesty. Finally, I made my way to Harrison's books. The bell above the door chimed, and Daniel looked up from behind the counter, his familiar, kind smile in place. Eleanor, he greeted. Good to see you. Daniel, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He nodded, sensing the gravity in my tone. He led me to the tiny break room in the back, a cramped space with a small table and 2 chairs. I pulled out Aunt Clara's worn envelope, placing it on the table between us. Inside were Clara's letter, the hospital birth records, and the DNA proof. The weight of the secret, now tangible in the envelope, was immense. There was a mistake. I began. my voice quiet, but clear. At the hospital, the night you were born, 2 babies were switched at birth. My son was given to another family, and theirs was given to me. I explained how I had raised Marcus, the son I thought was mine, and the gradual, heartbreaking realization that he didn't love me back in the way a son should. Daniel listened, his face expressionless, his body perfectly still. He picked up the documents, his eyes scanning each page in silence. He read Clara's detailed account, the Stark Hospital forms, the undeniable DNA reports, the truth unfurled before him. He looked up, his hazel eyes, so much like mine, wide with shock. "This is a lot," he said, his voice a whisper. "And you're Eleanor?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I'm Eleanor." He paused, then confessed. "I don't feel anything. Not yet. It's too much." "You don't have to, Daniel," I reassured him immediately. "You don't have to feel anything. I'm not here to ask for a place in your life. I just needed you to know the truth." He looked at me, a profound sadness in his eyes. "Why now?" "Because I couldn't live with the silence anymore," I replied, the truth of those words echoing in the small room. "It was crushing me." He nodded slowly. "I have parents, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I love them. They raised me. And you should," I affirmed, a genuine warmth in my voice. "They are your parents, absolutely. Nothing I've told you changes that. It only adds a layer to your story, and to mine." Another long silence stretched between us. He continued to hold the papers, turning them over in his hands. Then, he looked up, a tentative hope in his eyes. "Can we take it slow? Just casually, still meet for tea, talk about books?" "Yes," I agreed, a sense of relief washing over me. "We can take it as slow as you need." We sat there for a while longer, sipping tea, discussing books and the weather, the small talk now imbued with an entirely new, unspoken depth. Meanwhile, the ripples of my actions spread. The house sold much faster than expected, for the full asking price, forcing Marcus and Sophia to vacate within 30 days. I drove past one afternoon, seeing them packing. Sophia, her usual composure shattered, moved slowly, her shoulders slumped, her pride utterly fallen. Marcus paced frantically, yelling into his phone, his desperation palpable. Their empire had truly crumbled. Sophia lost all her remaining financial support and sponsorships. Her fraudulent business practices were quietly exposed, ruining her reputation. Marcus, with no degree, no real work experience beyond the job he had quit, struggled to find any meaningful employment. They ended up moving into a small, nondescript apartment on the outskirts of town, their lavish lifestyle a distant memory. My relationship with Daniel continued to blossom, slowly and organically. We continued our casual meetings, discussing books and sharing quiet moments. It was a relationship built not out of obligation, but out of choice, a gentle unfolding of connection. One day, he mentioned how his mom used to make the best apple butter every autumn, and I felt no sting. I understood his natural, deep bond with the woman who had truly raised him, and I honored it. A few weeks later, Marcus texted me. "Can we meet?" It read. "Just once." I agreed to meet him at a neutral park. He arrived looking a little better, less disheveled, but still haunted. He told me he had done his own DNA test, confirming the hospital's swap. He admitted he had treated me poorly, that he had allowed Sophia to rewrite our story, to erase my value. "I was selfish," he confessed, his voice quiet. Then, unexpectedly, he looked at me, a flicker of genuine concern in his eyes. "I hope he's good to you," he said, referring to Daniel. I smiled softly. "He is," I replied. "He's kind. And gentle." Marcus nodded, a profound sadness on his face. "I don't want to be in your life if it hurts you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But if there's ever a place for me, just a corner of it, I'd like to think." "I'll think about it, Marcus," I replied, a final moment of understanding passing between us. It wasn't a rejection, but a measured openness, an acknowledgement that the path forward was his to earn, not mine to pave. Later that evening, Daniel called, his voice bright. Eleanor, can you come to the bookstore? I want to show you something. When I arrived, he led me to a previously unused alcove at the back of the store. He had transformed it. There were new, empty shelves, a comfortable armchair, a small table with a tea set. It was a cozy reading space, a room from a dream. Above the entrance, a hand-painted sign read, "The next chapter." He reached into his pocket and handed me a small, brass key. "I want you to have it," he said, his eyes warm and sincere. "You gave someone your whole life, Eleanor. They didn't see you. But I do." He paused, a gentle smile. "This is for you. A space to write your own next chapter." That night, back in Aunt Claire's apartment, I opened my old notebook. I wrote, "I was a woman who gave until I vanished. Then I became the woman who took it all back. I became the author of my own ending." I finalized the arrangements for a donation, a significant portion of the house sale proceeds, to a foundation supporting women starting over. Those who, like me, needed a new beginning. Holding the brass key in my hand, I realized something profound. I wasn't just Eleanor anymore. I was Margaret Walker, my given birth name that Clara's notes had referenced. I was a woman, a survivor, finally free, and holding the key to my own door.